Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Goatman horror stories. First story. My roommate met the Goatman. On Saturday night, my roommate Lauren, her boyfriend Max, and I were eating takeout and watching random YouTube videos. Aliens, conspiracy theories, you know the drill. Max put on a Jeff the Killer video, and this kick-started us watching a bunch of creepypastas. Eventually, we began to watch Annecy's Goatman. I was on the edge of my seat, engrossed in the best creepypasta I had heard since the Slender Man. However, halfway through the video, my friend Lauren said in a terrified whisper, "Please turn that off." I closed the video. It wasn't unusual for Lauren to get a little freaked. However, when I looked at her, tears streaked her face, and every inch of her body was vibrating with tension. Her fingernails dug so hard in her hands, she drew blood. It took half an hour to bring her out of her petrified state. When she was reasonably calmer, in her bed, cocooned in the safety of her blankets, I asked her what was wrong. What follows is an accurate account of what Lauren told me on Saturday night. When I was 15, my parents decided to get divorced. In all honesty, I was relieved after living for months in an unhappy home. Mom and I were going to keep the house, and Dad was going to find somewhere new. In order to give him time to find a new place, my mom decided to fly out to her hometown in Texas and stay with her sister for a month. I was given the option of going with Mom or staying at home in London with Dad. I decided to go to Texas with Mom as I'd never visited the USA before. My aunt had twins a year younger than I and lived in a farmhouse with many acres of land. I figured I'd have an amazing summer with my cousins, exploring and adventuring. We arrived and my Aunt Jess was lovely. She had the same blonde hair and voluminous figure as my mom. My cousins Hank and Courtney were lanky, blonde bundles of energy. The three of us got along like a house on fire. In the beginning anyway, the first few days were spent swimming in the lake on their land, eating a picnic of tuna sandwiches and Reese's Pieces for lunch. We were exploring the attic one afternoon when we came across a tent. I immediately suggested we should have a camp out. This thrilled the twins, who suggested we camp by the lake. I disagreed. We always play at the lake. There was a massive woodland less than 10 minutes from the house. Why don't we camp in the woods? Hank and Courtney looked at each other and burst into hysterical laughter. Then they turned their freckled faces towards me, looking grave. "Those woods are haunted," Courtney stated. "Yeah," Hank agreed. "Everyone knows that." This only made me want to camp in the haunted woodland more, but Hank and Courtney refused. After days of pestering, they agreed to explore the woods during daylight. So one day, following lunch, we headed to the woods. It was cool in the wood. The trees offered excellent protection from the hot Texan sun. A narrow, dirt path snaked through the trees, so for a while, we stuck to the path, venturing further in the woods. But let's not go too far in. Courtney kept repeating. At some point, Hank seen a tree swing just slightly off the path and sprinted towards it. I sprinted after him, and reluctantly Courtney did too. "Climb on." Hank gestured towards the swing, and I clambered on board. He began to push me, so high. I was laughing hysterically, feeling free as a bird. Hank and Courtney laughed too, and soon all of Courtney's fear was thrown out the window. She was giggling, "My turn next. My turn next." Then, we heard a rustling in the bushes. Heart racing, I dismounted the swing. "What was that noise?" asked Courtney, fear creeping back in her voice. "Just an animal," Hank said. He didn't sound sure. The air was filled with a horrible smell, kind of like sour milk. We all covered our mouths and noses with our hands. Courtney gagged a little. "Let's get out of here," I said, a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. The smell followed us all along the path, and every once in a while we'd hear a rustle or the snap of a branch from the depths of the forest. "Just an animal, just an animal," Hank kept muttering. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, so towards the end of the path, I grabbed both Hank and Courtney's hands, and together we sprinted home. We all agreed we would never go back to the woods again. 2 nights later, I was in bed, drifting off to sleep on the sofa bed in basement, which long ago had been converted in an awesome games room with a pool table, TV, and sound system. The basement stairs were really creaky, and I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I sat up, and there was Courtney at the foot of the stairs. This wasn't unusual, as many nights, when Courtney couldn't sleep, she'd wander down to the basement, and we'd cozy up in the sofa bed together and watch movies until we drifted. "Not tonight, Courtney." I told her I'm dead beat. Dead beat. She repeated. There was that smell again, like sour milk. "Yeah, tired. My turn next," she said, and I noticed there was something weird about her voice. Each word was drawn out like she was just learning to speak. Her pitch was off too, way too shrill. I flipped on the lamp next to my mattress to get a better look at her, and her eyes were blank and emotionless, just staring right through me. A chill crept over me as she staggered, like a baby learning to walk, over to the sofa and sat herself down on it. "Are you okay?" I asked her. "OHKY," she repeated in that same off-canter voice. Then her whole body started to shake and convulse. I sprinted out off the basement to my aunt's room and started to batter on her bedroom door. She appeared moments later, eyes full of sleep, dressed in a pink robe. "Lauren," she sounded annoyed, but then must have seen the terror in my face. "Lauren, is everything okay?" Her tone now alarmed. "Courtney is in the basement. I think she's having a seizure." The commotion had risen Hank from his bed, and the three of us ran down to the basement. Only when we got to the basement, Courtney was gone. The sour smell still lingered in the air. We ran back upstairs, calling out Courtney's name. She appeared moments later, dressed in pajamas, not the shorts and tee I had seen her wear moments before. "What the hell is going on?" Courtney asked, both confusion and annoyance in her voice. My aunt explained to her what I had told her. "If this is a joke, Lauren, it's not funny." Courtney turned on me. "Waking me from bed at 2 a.m. is one thing. How dare you wake my mom?" But, my aunt interjected, "Courtney, your cousin, is going through a difficult period right now. Divorce isn't easy. Go easy on her." I tried to defend what I saw, but it was no use. They all looked at me like I was a raving lunatic. I returned to the basement and sat awake all night with the light on. The next day, my cousins were super frosty with me, and my mom gave me a lecture about playing pranks on the family. I was so confused. Were the twins pranking me? If so, it was a super cruel joke. It didn't seem like their style. Maybe I had dreamed the whole incident. A few nights later, I was in bed asleep when I was awakened by a piercing scream, Courtney's scream. I sprinted from the basement to where my mom, Aunt, Hank, and Courtney were all gathered on the upstairs landing. "You," Courtney thrust her finger at me, shaking like a leaf. "Me?" I said dumbly. I woke up and she was standing over my bed staring at me. It was really creepy. She just kept repeating, "Courtney, Courtney, Courtney," in a scary voice. When I screamed, she ran away. Now I was sure Courtney was the one playing pranks, and I wasn't going to let her get me in any more trouble. Bullshit. It slipped out, and my mom gave me a sharp slap from my tongue. My Aunt Jess rounded on me. "Bullshit, huh? I seen you sprinting down the stairs wearing the very same night shirt you are wearing now. That's impossible. Are you calling your aunt a liar?" My mom demanded. "No, but..." I trailed off while my family all glared at me. "I'm so sorry, Jessica." Mom apologized on my behalf. "I won't have your daughter terrorize my kids." Aunt Jess replied, hands on hips. We left Texas and flew back to England the following day, 2 weeks early. My mom keeps in touch with Jess. I've tried emailing Hank and Courtney, but they never respond. That bridge is forever burned. Since then, I had convinced myself the whole situation was a weird prank Courtney played on me that got out of hand. That was until I heard the story of the Goatman. Now, I think the whole situation was something much more sinister. Max and I are completely sure Lauren is being truthful. She is not the type to make up ghost stories, and if you guys had seen the fear in her eyes, you would all be convinced too. Max and I have convinced her to reach out to Hank and Courtney. If the Goatman still haunts the woods by their house, he could easily strike again. Lauren has asked them if the three of us can fly out to Texas and investigate. We are awaiting a response. I'll keep you all updated. Second story. My encounter with the Goatman. During 1999, I worked briefly as a vacuum cleaner salesman. Yes, the job was as terrible as it sounds, which required very late nights as I was often at customers' homes till around 9 p.m. before having to go back to the head office to check out, then drive back home, often not arriving home until 12 to 1 a.m. I was working late this one particular night and was on the home stretch, around 10 minutes from home, when my old crappy cheap Ford Fiesta started to overheat. I knew the car wouldn't make it home and had no choice other than to pull into a lay-by on top of the big, dark, deserted mountain next to my town. My hometown is literally the last town before they're just mountain and forest for countless miles. As I pulled into the mountain parking area with steam pouring my engine, this is 100% true, by the way, a white humanoid figure, obviously surprised that a car was pulling into a deserted parking space in the middle of the night, ran directly in front of my headlights as it sprinted from the edge of the clear side of the parking area and into the forest on the other side. It had no clothes, features, genitals, and hair, etc., just a white figure with 2 arms and 2 legs that appeared almost luminous and reflective in my lights. To say I shit myself is a bit of an understatement. My eyes popped out of my sockets when it ran in front of me. But then I realized that I was stuck in a dead car in a deserted mountain lay-by in the middle of the night with no mobile phone signal, as this was back in the days when mobile phones were just starting to become popular, but large chunks of the country were missing from network coverage. I had no choice but to sit there for around an hour until my car cooled down, as it gave up the ghost pretty much the second I pulled in. So I sat in my car, alone, staring directly into the forest where the thing I saw had run. No weapon, no way to contact, any way to let them know where I was, and no passing traffic to possibly flag down. During my wait in the car, I obviously started to wonder what I'd seen. I knew for a fact that I had actually seen something, and it was not a trick of the light. That much was clear. I discounted sheep, horses, foxes, or any other animal that populated the Welsh Mountains, as I was certain it a 2-legged humanoid creature shape, with roughly human head, body, arms, and legs proportions. The obvious answer would have been that it was some very strange man who for some reason was wearing a white entire body stocking. Think Charlie's Greenman in It's Always Sunny. But since we were miles away from the nearest home, and I was the only car around, it's highly unlikely that someone would have spent hours walking through thick forests just to hang out at a parking area in the middle of a forest wearing a unitard. Since I could rule out possible animals or humans, I had to consider the alternative, which isn't a nice thing to think about when you are stuck in a broken-down car with this creature very possibly still outside. I didn't think it was aliens, as it was too tall compared to the classic look, while any type of apparition or ghost doesn't tend to run away from people when surprised. I'm not sure if there is some kind of Welsh version of a Wendigo, but if I had to categorize the encounter, this would be my number 1 choice. There was always talk of satanic rituals and witches practicing in the forest when I was a kid, and also of illegal bare-knuckle fights where people had been killed and buried there to cover up the crime, but I didn't think much of it at the time and always wrote it off to superstition and rumor. But now I'm not so sure. Eventually my car cooled down enough for me to limp back home. No one really believed me when I told them what I saw and are adamant that it was a sheep, but to this day, I will swear that the creature I encountered was something different. I've been in the forest many times since camping, biking, and hiking, and have never seen anything like that again, but whenever I go there, I'm always aware of the possible presence of the Goatman. Third story. My sister spent the night in my apartment. A few days ago, after me and my girlfriend finally took care of a terrible situation, I got a number from a person I thought I didn't know. So against my better judgment, I picked up the phone, and it was my sister. She told me she was coming over to my state for a day as part of a job trip and asked if she could spend the night at my place. Naturally, attempting to be a good brother, I welcomed her with open arms and said she was free to sleep here. Now I want to make it clear that I hadn't seen my sister for a few months prior to this, because she lives on the East Coast, so we seldom get the chance to see each other. I also hadn't talked to her for about a month due to a small argument we had, but it was nothing too bad. So she arrived at my apartment, and we all watched television together and had a good time. At around 11 or 12, my sister suggested, quite demandingly, we should all sleep because me and my girlfriend had work tomorrow and she had to get up early. So, while we found it a little strange, me and my girlfriend went to bed, and that was that. Nothing odd happened until I woke up in the middle of the night to go pee. When I woke up, my bedroom door was open, and I specifically remembered closing it before bed because my girlfriend was now too scared and felt vulnerable with it open. After my eyes adjusted to the darkness, my heart almost exploded when I noticed my sister standing at the doorway. I asked what she was doing, and she said that she had just woken up to get some water. Mostly because I was still very sleepy, I dismisses it as nothing and used the bathroom and got back to my bed. Before sleeping again, I wondered why my sister needed to open our door if she just needed to get some water from the kitchen. Creeped out, I just went back to sleep. At 4 a.m., my phone alarm went off. This is very wrong for 2 reasons. 1, I would never wake up at 4 a.m. and 2, I never use an alarm. My girlfriend is pretty much my personal alarm in the circumstance that I need one. I thought nothing of it and just switched it off. I then heard some soft giggling coming from my kitchen and got really scared. Now I don't have a gun or anything, so I just picked up a vase next to my bed and walked into the kitchen. I heard a voice from the guest room asking me what I was doing, and it was my sister. I said nothing and went back to bed and fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up at 8 a.m. to my girlfriend shaking me and telling me to wake up. She said that my sister had taken all her stuff and left before she woke up. I tried calling her to ask why she left so abruptly, but her phone was apparently off. I walked into the kitchen and saw the very vase I carried there the night before smashed into many pieces. After this, I tried calling the number I thought was my sister's again, but it was still off. I called my sister's old number, or what I assumed was now her old number, and she picked up the phone. I asked why she left without a goodbye, and she asked me what I was talking about. I explained to her the events of last night, and she told me she was in Tokyo on a trip. She Skyped me an hour later, and she was, indeed, in Tokyo, and has been for the last few days. I could see the Tokyo buildings behind her hotel window. She told me to call the police as we ended our conversation, but I didn't. I don't want the police to think this is a prank or something, but I was just so terrified. I still have no idea what happened as I write this. 4th story, Goatman's Bridge. I'm sorry if this seems scattered and doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make much sense to me either, but I have to write this down somewhere so someone knows what happened in case things get worse. I'm not sure how that could happen, but after what I just experienced, I'm not sure what to expect anymore. I'm not sure how to begin this, so I guess I'll just start at the beginning. I spent a lot of my free time urban exploring. If you're not familiar with this, it usually involves finding old abandoned buildings and, well, exploring them. I know it doesn't sound like much fun, but living in an old college town, there's not much fun to be had. See, I like to collect old relics. For example, recently, I was exploring the old courthouse that was abandoned after the new one was built, and I found an old gavel. They're sort of like trophies for me. I was never very athletic or excelled in school, so I don't have a shelf of golden athletes captured in the middle of kicking or throwing a ball or frame certificates recognizing high grades. So these old souvenirs are what I like to show off. I usually do this alone since no one in my small circle of friends is interested in this sort of thing. They tell me that it's creepy and that they're afraid to go into old buildings at night. I tell them that I always have a flashlight with me and plenty of batteries for backup, but that doesn't seem to bring them any comfort. I think they've seen one too many scary movies. Don't get me wrong, I love the horror genre, but I don't take any of that to heart. I don't believe in the supernatural or ghosts or spooky things like that. I like to go at night because it provides plenty of cover in case the local police department decides they want to do some exploring of their own. Like I said earlier, I live in an old college town, and being of college age, you would think it would be easier to meet like-minded people that share some of my interests. Apparently, I've discovered a niche when it comes to hobbies. That was until I met Harlan. I noticed her eating alone in our school's dining hall and decided to try and strike up a conversation with her. I asked if I could sit down with her, and she reluctantly accepted with what I think was an eye roll, but I'm not sure. Either way, I took my seat and began asking her my best get-to-know-you questions. It was exactly what you would expect, given our surroundings. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your major? She was nice enough and answered my lame questions and returned a few of her own. I found out she was from East Texas and came here to study music to become a band director for any high school that would hire her, as she put it. She was desperate to get out of her small town and move to the city where she would never have to see a pine tree again. I thought things were going really well, and then she asked me what my hobbies are. If I'm honest, I figured this is where our conversation would end. I answered her question with barely any eye contact and some stammering. I told her about exploring and my collection of trophies, and to my surprise, she seemed kind of interested. She told me, back home, she was into paranormal investigations. I feigned interest since I think all that is bullshit to begin with, but she had pretty eyes and an amazing smile. I guess my acting was pretty convincing since she asked if I wanted to join her soon on one of her investigations. I didn't really say yes, but I also didn't say no. I asked her where she was interested in going next, and she asked me if I've ever heard of Goatman's Bridge. I've lived near this town my whole life. Of course, I've heard of Goatman's Bridge. I've just never been there. If you aren't familiar with this local legend, I'll fill you in. The story goes there was a goat farmer by the name of Oscar Washburn in the 1930s who made a living by selling meat, milk, cheese, and hides. He apparently did really well for himself and his family, and this did not settle well with the local Ku Klux Klansmen. You had to cross what was known as the Old Alton Bridge to get to his farm. So to help his business, Washburn posted a sign on the bridge that read, "This way to the Goatman." Well, this must have been the final straw for the local assholes, because late one night, they broke into Washburn's home and dragged him to the old bridge where they had a noose waiting for him. They mercilessly tightened the noose around his neck and flung him over the side of the bridge. When they went down to the riverbank below to confirm their murderous deed, they found nothing but an empty noose and undisturbed waters. Confused and still in a blind rage, they went back to Oscar's farm and burned down his home with his family still inside. Oscar was never found or seen again. My cell phone rang later that night, and I was kind of surprised to see it was Harlan. I tried to answer with my smoothest, "Hey, how's it going?" She laughed at my attempt and told me she was going to Goatman's Bridge and wanted to know if I would like to join her. I told her I was free as I closed my textbook, putting my homework on pause. She told me she would be at my place in 20 minutes. I get dressed and grab my backpack in case I find any souvenirs. My hopes were low for this, but best case scenario, that sign is still there and would look great on my wall. I hadn't told Harlan yet that I don't believe in the paranormal or a spiritual realm or whatever you want to call it. I figured I would let her know about my skepticism at a later date. I get a text letting me know she's waiting for me outside, so I head out the door and get in her car, throwing my bag into the back seat. As soon as she starts driving to Goatman's Bridge, she begins to unload about how excited she is for this. There's nothing like this back in East Texas. It's all just old haunted houses with tales of Confederate soldiers or someone's dead grandma lurking in the attic. Boring. So what are you hoping to find? I ask her, "Are you kidding?" She shouts, "I want to see the Goatman." See him? I thought you just said that seeing old dead spirits is boring. She shoots me a side-eye glance. I thought you knew all about this legend. She sarcastically mocked. I gave her a confused glance. She rolled her eyes and explained that this one is different. She said that she has never hunted a vengeful spirit before, and that she believes they are easier to communicate with. But if his body was never found, then how are you sure there's even a spirit to communicate with? Something happens that's beyond our understanding when someone is murdered with that much hate. A piece of them is left behind that wants revenge. She explained. And exactly why would you want to mess with someone who's that angry? I asked, surprising myself that I'm even entertaining the thought of a ghost that can hold a grudge. Spirits can't hurt the living. She stated, "We had to take a back road since the bridge has been shut down ever since they built a new one. We parked at the orange and white roadblocks and got out of the car to make the trek to the bridge. It was dark. I know that's an obvious statement, but this was a kind of dark I've never seen before. I could see stars that I've never seen before, but I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I grab a flashlight from my bag, as does Harlan from hers. We turn them on with what seemed like the loudest click my flashlight has ever made. That's when I noticed how silent it was. I couldn't hear any wind, or animals, or crickets chirping. It was eerie to say the least. "What's in your bag?" I asked Harlan to break the silence. "Just some EVP equipment, some thermal cameras. Just some basic ghost hunting tools. Sounds like you're ready to start your own TV show." I chuckled. If looks could kill, I would have been dead where I stood. She obviously didn't appreciate that one. Those shows are bullshit. They don't know what they're doing. I could see she was passionate about this topic, so I didn't push it any further. "There it is." She gasped, her flashlight fixed on the old bridge. Her pace increased, and I tried to keep up, but she reached the bridge before I could. This was your typical old bridge. Concrete road with steel beams coming up and over the road in a crisscross pattern. I couldn't tell if the beams were supposed to be red or just rusted over time. I scanned the bridge for the "this way to the Goatman" sign I was hoping for, but no luck. I noticed Harlan reach for her cell phone in her back pocket. "Just in time," she said with a smile on her face. "Just in time for what?" I asked. "Just in time to summon the Goatman," she said with way more enthusiasm than I expected. "Summon? What do you mean, summon? I thought this was just some ghost that hung around the bridge. You're making this sound like some kind of demon or something," I said, starting to actually feel a little nervous and uneasy about the whole thing. "Are you scared right now?" Harlan asked with a huge smile across her face. "Look, these things usually end up being nothing. Best case scenario, I'll pick up an EVP or catch something on my thermal camera." "Okay, well, how do we summon the Goatman?" I asked, poorly hiding any nervousness in my voice. "Legend says that if you knock 3 times on the steel beams exactly at midnight, he'll appear to you." I look at my phone to see that we're about 5 minutes away from midnight. Harlan begins unpacking some equipment from her bag. She sets her thermal camera up on a tripod, facing the opposite direction from which we approach the bridge. She turns on some special voice recorder that she tried explaining to me, but I couldn't really follow what she was saying. She checks the camera one more time to make sure it's just right. She approaches one of the now ominous-looking red steel beams with her phone in one hand, the other balled into a fist, and raised just above her head, waiting to strike the steel at exactly midnight. I'm standing just a few feet away from her, frozen with uncertainty about what's about to happen. The eerie silence is broken when Harlan knocks 3 times on the steel beam, each resounding with an echoing metallic bang that seems to go on forever. We both hold our breath, waiting for something to happen, but we only hear more silence. I start to move my flashlight off of Harlan and towards the surrounding trees. I turn in a full circle before returning my light back to her, and I can see the disappointment written all over her face. I start to suggest that we just go hit a bar and let me buy her a couple drinks, but I barely get the words out of my mouth before we heard a loud crack in the trees. The kind of sound you hear when something heavy steps on a dry twig. We both jumped and trained our flashlights on where the sound came from. Yet for some reason, we were facing the opposite direction from the other. I was facing the east side of the bridge and Harlan the west. We both exchanged confused glances as to how this could have happened. Why was she facing that direction? The sound clearly came from behind me. I wish that had remained the worst thing about this experience, but things got worse, way worse. While we were trying to figure out why the other one was wrong, we heard the most grim sound come from, well, all around us. It started kind of quiet at first and grew louder and louder. It was the scream of a goat, but not just a goat. It sounded like a goat and a man were screaming together at the same time, but from the same source, as if they were one being. I kept trying to figure out which direction the sound was coming from, but the more I moved across the bridge, the more the screams seemed to move with me, like the sound was coming from the east and the west side of the bridge at the same time. Harlan and I seemed to meet in the middle of the bridge, just behind her camera. That's when all the screaming seemed to meet at the same location. We both spun around to train our flashlights on the sound, and that's when we saw him, or it, or whatever this thing was. It was a man, well, at least the body was. There were 2 legs, a torso, and 2 arms with human hands on the end of each, all of which were covered in muscles that seemed to flex and retract with every breath this thing took. Its breathing was loud, much louder than any human I've ever heard, but that may be due to the fact that this thing did not have the head of a human. Instead, sitting on top of this thing's shoulders was the head of a goat. And not a small goat, this thing was in proportion to the rest of its body. The fur was a deep black with solid black eyes to match. 2 massive horns protruded from its skull and pointed towards the back of its head. 2 large ears sat just beneath its horns, jutting straight out. The most disturbing thing about all of this had to be where the goat head met the human body. It seemed as if they had been crudely stitched together. Each point where a needle would have met skin was still bleeding, as if this thing was recently created or the wounds just never healed. I noticed Harlan was no longer watching this beast, but instead looking down at her thermal camera to see if it was picking this up. I could see her eyes widen when she realized it was. Something like this could make her famous and most likely ignite the world of paranormal investigation. Our attention was quickly taken away from the camera and focused back on the Goatman when it let out another horrifying scream. Its mouth wide open, exposing its long yellow teeth and lengthy black tongue. When it finished its deafening scream, it charged towards us. I immediately turned and bolted back for the car. Harlan, however, tried to grab her camera before running away. "Harlan, leave it!" I screamed. Just as she picked up the camera and turned to run, the Goatman grabbed her by the back of her neck with a grip that she would not be able to break free from. I thought he would come for me too, but he just stopped and stared at me with Harlan writhing and screaming in his grasp. I stood frozen, wanting to help her, but knowing there was nothing I could do. I don't carry weapons on me, and I don't think weapons would help in this situation anyways. Harlan looked me in the eyes with this look I'll never forget. Her face conveyed a look of pure terror that I've never seen before. The Goatman quickly turned and ran back into the woods, dragging Harlan behind him. Her screams got even worse when she realized there was a fate coming that we were both unsure of. I know the sensible thing would have been to get into the car and drive far away from here, but I couldn't bring myself to just leave without her. I started chasing after Harlan and the Goatman, crossing the bridge and heading into the woods. There was no path to follow, so all I could do was follow Harlan's screams. I ran for what felt like an eternity. I could feel my lungs burning and my side beginning to cramp. I could hear the screaming getting closer and louder, so I must have been heading in the right direction, even though I had lost all sense of direction. I came to an abrupt halt when I entered into a small clearing. Oh God, what I saw next nearly made me vomit. In the clearing was one giant oak tree, surrounded by what must have been a dozen of these goat people holding torches and making that same noise that Goatman was making on the bridge. Except these weren't screams like we heard earlier, but more like a chanting, as if I had stumbled upon some sort of ritual. Sitting upright at the base of the tree was Harlan, but she was no longer screaming. In fact, she wasn't doing anything at all. I couldn't tell if she was dead or just unconscious. Her body was completely limp and leaning against the tree. I saw one of these goat people enter the circle walking towards Harlan, and I realized it was the one we saw on the bridge. He wasn't holding a torch like the others, however. He was holding the head of a goat up in the air like it was a prized possession. The chanting seemed to get louder and faster the closer he got to her. When he was standing over her unconscious body, he brought the goat head down with enough force to make Harlan's head disappear inside of it, as if she was wearing a Halloween mask. He then reached to the tip of one of his horns and snapped off a piece a couple of inches long and began sewing the severed goat head to Harlan's skin. There seemed to be some sort of sinewy thread attached to the end he broke off. I could hear the sickening sound of his horn piercing her skin and this thread being pulled through the wound. When he was finished, he put the thread in his mouth and used his teeth to bite off the unused sinew. He stuffed what was left back into his horn. The chanting from the onlooking goat people grew to that level where it seemed to be coming from all around me. The Goatman placed his hand on Harlan's forehead, or what was now her new forehead, and let out a deep guttural yell. I watched Harlan's body come back to life, slowly at first, her hands feeling her new goat head. She let out what seemed like a scream of sadness and disbelief, her open mouth revealing the same rotting teeth and black tongue that we saw earlier. She slowly rose to her feet and took in her surroundings and what I assumed was now her new family. Her head jerked towards me, and she pointed in my direction. They all turned to look at me, and I knew I had to get out of there. I wasted no time in turning and running away as fast as I could. I wasn't sure if I was headed in the right direction, but I could hear their voices in the distance behind me. I just kept running. I couldn't let them turn me into one of those things. I somehow found the bridge again and realized that I could no longer hear them behind me. I raced to Harlan's car and jumped inside. Thank God she left the keys in the ignition. The engine came to life with a roar, and I threw it into drive and took off. I didn't stop for any red lights or stop signs. It was so late by this point there weren't any other cars on the road. I drove back to my place, and now I'm typing this to make sure no one goes trying to find the Goatman. Please, no matter what you hear, stay away from that bridge. I'm still shaking and I can't calm down. See, the thing is, and maybe I'm just going crazy, but I swear if I'm really quiet, I can hear a goat's low bleat in the distance. Fifth story, Goatman while camping. What was this? Hey, I'm not really new. I've used Reddit before, but I wanted to make this profile to tell everyone some pretty terrifying stuff that has happened to me in the past. Of all the creepiest, this story takes the cake. If you've read the Anoncease Goatman story, you'll find similarities in mine. I couldn't believe some stuff when I read it and how it compared to this experience. It was 2007. I was with a couple of my friends camping. I was 16 and was just with some 16 to 18-year-olds on this fun camping trip out in the woods behind some of these guys' houses. We picked a spot in the clearing where it would be like a little party kind of site, although I don't do drugs or even smoke weed or any of that. I grew up with that going on all around me, so I tried to avoid it. But nobody brought weed or anything along, I don't think. So we all hung out in this clearing with 3 different tents set up and with a fire pit in the middle. We had planned to spend 4 to 5 days. It was summer vacation, so we didn't have school. I think this was early August. Anyway, we all decided to hang out in the clearing, roasting marshmallows and everyone but me having beers. I sat around making s'mores, and the sun was just beginning to set, and we were all having a good time. At around 7 o'clock or so, we heard something moving in the bushes nearby, and someone threw an empty beer bottle at the bushes. We heard the smash and watched something climb out of the bushes and lumber back into the trees. We thought it was just some psycho person, but everyone got a little bit nervous. Later that night, I was asleep in the tent with 3 other people. The only person I knew was my friend, Paul, who invited me along. I remember everything being silent, and then I heard a sort of popping sound by the fire, and we all sat up. Crawling out, we could hear people in the other tent's voices saying, "What was that?" Paul unzipped the tent, and we crawled out. The fire, which we had put out about an hour or 2 ago, was now roaring with flames. We put out and thought maybe someone poured gasoline all over the fire and lit a match or lighter and lit the fire. But we never heard the gas pouring or a match being struck/lighter being flicked. We also didn't hear anybody running away because we would have heard them. It was at this point there was an awful smell, but had a stuffy nose and couldn't make it out really. It may have been a skunk, but Paul said one of the other guys said it was like rotten meat, but we had not smelled it earlier or since. Some other people began holding their shirts up to their noses as if a pungent smell had just appeared. We were all a little on edge, but I guess some people agreed let's just stay here. Nobody brought any guns to fend herself off, but one guy, who was about 18, said he had a pocket knife. Our second day here, nothing happened until it became night again. At around 4 a.m., we were all fast asleep and awoken by noises behind our tent. We started to get out when Paul said, "Shut up for a minute." We sat in silence, listening to the noises which sounded like voices I couldn't make out. The voices seemed to be coming closer to us, and we quietly climbed out of the tent. The voices still approaching our camp. The 2 other guys in our tent crept to the other tents and woke the other people up, telling them to get out here at once. All 13 of us stood quietly listening to the voices get closer and louder. At the point where they had gotten behind our tent, we heard the voices stop, but an eerie humming noise was coming from the trees all around us. One of the guys, I think named Ben, who was 17 or 18, walked to about 10 feet from the tree line where the voices had been coming from. He said, "Oi, who is there?" And we quietly waited for a response. We heard nothing except distant crickets. He walked back to us, and right then we heard the voices moving away, which to me sounded like what Ben had asked. "Oi, who's there?" But it didn't sound like Ben moving away, almost like something was trying to mimic what he sounded like. I could hear the voice sort of crackly and jumpy repeating those words as it moved off into the distance. We all got back to our tents, but didn't sleep. The next day, someone had left their house to grab something. They came back a little later with a potato gun, saying he'd shoot out of the thing bothering our campsite. Around 7 p.m., not really partying, but just huddled around the fire, a girl, just one of two, stands up, practically pissing herself, and we find out what's wrong. Here's one of the similarities I found with the well-known Goatman story. She said that last night, when we were listening to the voices, there was another person with us. There was 13 of us now, but she insisted that there had been a 14th. Reading the Anansi Goatman story and connecting that experience later made my butt clench. We all started to get nervous again, and Ben told us he was going to run back to his house. He and Potato Gun Guy were neighbors, and he said he was going to get his father to come out here with a gun and wait. Someone went with him, and Paul and I were just talking to each other about how we could leave early if shit got too chaotic, which is what's starting to get to now. We were in the middle of talking about how we should pack up when we saw Ben standing in the woods. It was clearly him with his blue hoodie and jeans, and he was looking straight at us from about 40 feet away, but we didn't know what TL he was doing. The person who went with him wasn't standing next to him. It was just him standing alone watching us. It was a 25-minute walk back to his house, but he couldn't have been back 5 minutes later. Everyone got really uncomfortable, and people started yelling, "Hey, Ben, what are you doing?" But he just kept watching us. We watched as he seemed to slink back into the trees. By now, people were scared out of their minds, and I was too. Why was Ben being a prick and just staring at us and not doing anything? We decided to pile into one tent and wait. A short while later, the other Ben turned up with his dad, and the other person that went with him and his dad was holding a hunting rifle. Ben told them what happened with the voices, and the father walked that way into the trees and took a look around. He said it felt like eyes were watching him from every direction. Paul then told Ben's dad that we just saw another Ben standing in the woods staring at us. Ben's dad walked over there and looked around too. He came back and said he could stay with us and the gun, but said he would control it because if we got drunk and started shooting a gun around, we'd all kill ourselves. He slept in Ben's tent. It was our third night here, and it was really creepy. We quietly listened for it being anywhere nearby. Paul had a funny look in his eyes and started sweating. He later told me that while we were all sitting around, he saw a strange figure moving through the woods, moving its arms around in a strange, jumpy motion. Around 2 a.m., we were all going to get ready for bed, and we heard it. It was saying something, but in a highish voice. It sounded like it was saying, "Who's there?" completely mimicking what Ben had said the night before. Ben's dad tried to pinpoint where the voice was coming from and fired a shot into the trees. That gunshot was loud. Right after, we could hear a creepy chanting like male voice. I was scared. Paul was scared. Everyone was. The chanting sounded like a deep voice chanting, so not multiple people. Underneath the chanting, we could hear something mumbling noises. Again, another shot was fired, but I saw what Ben's dad was shooting at. It was a figure crouched low by some bushes. It looked like a direct hit, but the figure did not move. Instead, it stood up, sort of hunched over and moved back into the forest. We raced back into our tents, and I could hear crying and moaning coming from right behind our tent. All four of us in the tent were getting scared, and then I could kind of smell a strong vinegar smell that was very powerful. Then I noticed what looked like fingertips moving along the tent wall and to the door and moved down the zipper to grab the part you used to open. Paul dove over to the zipper and held it down as whoever or whatever tried to pull it open. Paul and one other guy in the tent started yelling, "Who's out there?" And after a minute, we could hear a screeching noise as this thing took off into the darkness. We decided to say F the fourth and fifth day. Let's get out of here in the morning. Here's the scariest experience of that night. At 3:45 a.m., checking my watch, I had to go pee. Since what had just occurred not long ago, I decided I wasn't getting out of the tent, and maybe I could stick my bird out a small zipper opening, but then I pictured whatever was out there biting or ripping my thing off, so I decided to open up the tent, slither outside, just slightly, and pee to the side of the door. As soon as I was finished, I noticed someone by the furthest tent away. I grabbed my flashlight beside my pillow and turned it on and shined it towards the person. It looked like Paul, back facing to me, hunched over by the tent. But Paul was right behind me, sleeping in the tent. I crawled back inside, but kept my light shined on the other Paul. I whispered, "Paul, wake up." And the moment he did, I looked outside to see the other Paul stand up and turn facing toward me and stare at me. I dove back in and leapt under my sleeping bag and huddled there awake as I explained to Paul what I had just seen. I guess at one point in the night, I was facing another way and was freaking out, but one of the guys in the tent said he woke up, eyes still half closed as he rolled over. He could see the other Paul looking through the part in the tent flap I didn't close. He thought it was just Paul coming to wake them up, but realized the real Paul was asleep right beside him. We packed up and left. So I guess that's the creepiest thing that happened to me. I don't exactly know where this forest was. It was on private property, I think, but goddamn was that scary. I have a couple different stories I can share, but I don't think they were as scary as this. Sixth story, Goatman in the mountains. You see, I was young and my imagination was wild, but what I am about to tell you still terrifies me to these days. I went camping. The camp was located in the mountains. We went for 2 weeks, but hell these weeks would turn into. It was a night for telling stories, scary stories. Also, I was the only person sitting with my back to the fence. The fence was a barber fence, and the bushes were growing on the other side. We had animals, so we took care of them. So here we had deer, wolf, 2 horses, and few wild birds. So everyone was telling scary stories. We were 17 people around the fire, all girls and boys. Then my turn came to tell a story, and I decided to tell the story of the Goatman. I started with telling the Anansi story. Everyone knows the story, so I don't think I need to write the whole story. But when I was telling them about the guys in the story being freaked out and hiding in the trailer, a goddamn branch snapped behind my back. Don't forget, I was sitting with my back to the fence. Everyone bolted up, and I almost jumped over the damn fire pit. One of the boys, Vlad, pointed his flashlight to the darkness of the woods, and we tried to see something, anything, 4-5 minutes we were staring. Nothing. Have in mind that the flashlight was strong enough to see nearby. After 5 minutes, we decided to sit back, and I continued with the story, keeping on, and reaching the part with the girls screaming in terror. I shit you not, right behind my back, the sound of the bushes made my skin rise and goosebumps rustle. Rustle? Like someone or something was taunting us. The sound was like someone brushed their hand on this thick bush. Everyone jumped, and Peter, a rather tall boy, screamed, "Stop it! It's not funny! Stop messing with us!" He was scared despite being the tallest of us. The second thing that made me chill to the bone, the animals went crazy. The deer was running in her cage. The wolf, which always was running in his big cage at nighttime, was now whimpering in his den. The horses were running further from the fence we were around. That was it. All of us started to freak out. By this point, the boys were scared more than the girls. I looked at them and said, "I am close to the end. I'll finish the story and we're out of here." One of the girls screamed into the darkness, "If this is our head boys and head girls, please stop. It's not funny." Everyone heard someone coming from the cottages we were staying in. The guys were coming our way were our head man and head girls. We were terrified, looking at the fence and back to them. There's no way that they got so fast to the cottages without us noticing. They told us to cut the pranks off and put out the fire and go back to the dormitories. As I promised, I almost finished the story when we all smelled something like rotting eggs, disgusting and strong. Someone suggested that someone threw something in the fire pit or the animals' cages were not clean, but I knew damn well it was not it. The damn thing or animal decided to make the most uncommon noise behind my back, I jumped over the pit, and we all huddled in one place as Vlad pointed his flashlight. We all froze like an animal freeze we did. I still remember that moment in my life from the darkness of the forest reflected by the flashlight were peering at us a pair of yellow eyes. The height for these eyes was not okay with me. We were staring at each other for a good 10 minutes when it decided to bare its teeth and screech at us. We all bolted, forgetting about the damn fire. As I turned around, these damn eyes were peering at us and shinning in the damn darkness without the flashlight. We all run inside our dormitories, and the head boy of ours asked us, "What the hell is going on? Why you didn't put out the fire?" He was angry, but we didn't care. We refused to go back there again. When he came back after putting the fire out, he looked paler than usual and said for us to go and sleep. He locked the doors and windows, which we never did before. All of us couldn't sleep, hearing the strangest noises coming from the woods, noises that were not like any animal we knew. This night, nor we, nor the animals were calm. The next morning, we went to look at the place where we had our stories. I shit you not. The bonfire was destroyed. The bushes where I was sitting were bent together with the fence. And then the most chill realization came over me. There was a hole in the fence like someone tried to sneak in. It was torn like it was a piece of paper to this thing. Needless to say, I was shocked. I was shaking, and my friend came and said, "I don't think we all imagined that. But why did you decide to tell that story?" I was speechless. As we were passing our days, mostly all of us decide never to talk about it again. When I was about to leave, I saw our head boy near the fence peering into the woods. So I went to him, I called out to him, and he motioned to come closer. So I did. He said, that night when I came out to put out the fire, I smelled something disgusting, rotting. The moment I heard this noise near the fence, I saw something that scared me to death. There is a silhouette of something standing in the darkness, bending over the fence with two yellow glowing eyes, hunching over the fire pit. I screamed and ran back to the cottages when he paused and was shaking. When I looked back, it was gone. I guess he didn't lie. Next morning, I saw a hole in the fence, and the animals were jumpy, so I saw from the other side of the fence prints, but not ones of a boar, doe, elk, or some other animal. Those were cloven like goats. He looked at me with teary eyes. I felt regret telling that damn story. I didn't think that it will become such a terrifying reality. Just a myth, right? Just a story. Years pass, and I still can't bring myself go alone camping or going to the mountain, only in big groups. So that's my story. I felt like it was a long time till I made myself write this here. So I hope people will learn never to mess around with him. Seventh story. My encounter with the Goatman. My friends and I were out camping in Maryland near a river. We set up a whole weekend where we would go tubing, which meant we would get in these giant inflatable tires and float down the river. We got there on Friday, go tubing on Saturday, and leave on Sunday. It was me, my girlfriend, her best friend, and her boyfriend. The four of us were supposed to have a great weekend together that instead turned into a nightmare that will keep me away from the outdoors for good. I'm pretty sure I had an encounter with the Goatman. We arrived on Friday with no fuss. We set up our tents at the designated campground and made dinner. There were no other campers around us since school had started up again, so we had the area to ourselves. We drank all night, the other three drinking more than me because I'm not a fan of the hard stuff, just a few beers. It was late at night, probably around midnight, when I had to pee, so I left the campsite and walked down the path a little bit into the woods. When I found a good spot, I unzipped my pants and began to relieve myself when I looked ahead, and faintly in the moonlight, I could see a figure moving in between the trees. The moon was about half full, so there wasn't much light to make out the features. The leaves and sticks crunched underneath it. Just as I was finishing up, this thing started to make this weird noise. It sounded like a muffled goat sound, but not quite right. Like a person was imitating a goat. It kept walking around like it was looking for something, but whatever it was scared the hell out of me. So I ran back to the campsite and acted like it didn't happen. My friends were so drunk, I don't know how they would have reacted. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else, so I made breakfast. At around noon, we drove up the river about 3 miles using the camp's van service that would drop us off, and we would tube down the river back to our campsite. I had pretty much forgotten about the weird encounter from the previous night until I had a weird feeling of being watched while floating down the river. It was all woods on both sides of the river, so I couldn't really confirm my feeling, but it ruined my whole experience while going down the river. It creeped the hell out of me. My friend started to feel it too when I told them. The other boyfriend claims he saw someone on the riverbank, but no one else saw it. Once we got back to camp, I told him what I saw Friday night, and it really creeped him out. That's when the boyfriend said the thing he saw kind of looked like a weirdly shaped man from a distance. We were all scared and decided that we'd leave first thing in the morning for checkout when the park rangers returned. After a while, we began drinking again and pretty much forgot about our fears and for a moment had fun again. It wasn't until later that night that my fear returned. We were all pretty drunk at this point, and we were doing that thing. When you're drunk, you kind of have those heart-to-hearts with each other and talk about life. That kind of conversation, you know. We started to hear those noises again. It started off in the distance at first, then got closer and closer to our campsite. We heard noises all around us, just twigs breaking, scratching on trees, and more of those goat noises mixed with a man growling. None of us had a weapon, so we were pretty scared and huddled close to each other. The scariest part was that the bugs stopped making noises. Eventually, we all drank some more and fell asleep around the campfire. I woke up in the middle of the night, probably because I sensed something was wrong. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like sleep paralysis or something where I couldn't move and couldn't speak. I opened my eyes and saw this terrifying thing in between all of us. It had the body of a skinny man with a distorted face and long, unnatural arms. I saw that it was pacing back and forth between us, would stop and look at my girlfriend and arch its back and act like it was chuckling. It kept twitching its body and sniffing the air around everyone. The Goatman finally came over to me and looked me in the eyes. It had these dark pitted eyes and its mouth was wet with drool. It got close to me and opened its mouth, making that noise into my face. The noise must have woken the boyfriend, and he started to scream, which scared the creature, and he ran off on all fours back into the woods. I was finally able to move, and I crawled over to my girlfriend and held her the rest of the night. First thing in the morning, we packed our stuff and checked out at the main lodge. We will never go back to those woods in Maryland again. There is something living out there, guys, and I'm telling you this story because I don't want anything to happen to you. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.